Welcome, everyone. It's great to see a capacity crowd here for our exciting event today. I'm Harry Lewis. I'm the Interim Dean of SEAS, Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second annual Dean's Lecture on Computational Science and Engineering. Today we have the honor of a lecture from Christian Rudder, Harvard class of 1998, a graduate in mathematics. And Christian, after he graduated from Harvard, co-founded a company called Spark.com, whose signature product was was called Spark Notes. Perhaps some of you at Harvard may have heard of it before. Spark.com was ultimately sold to Barnes & Noble, and he went on to co-found the online dating site OkCupid. Now, before we hand the presentation over to Christian, I should note that Harvard students have a very rich tradition in the computerized matchmaking space. In fact, it goes back 50 years. Another former math concentrator named Jeffrey Tarr is sitting right here in the audience. Jeff, could you stand and be recognized by the crowd? So Jeffrey, in the mid-1960s, he was sitting around his room in Winthrop House, thinking of ways to make finding a date less chancy and more scientific. Jeff and some friends came up with a detailed survey and asked fellow students, first at Harvard and later at other campuses also, to send in their answers. Now, this was before electronic mail and before electronic commerce. People sent their answers and $3 fee by US mail. And so was born Operation Match. An early trickle of completed questionnaires became a torrent. The matchmaking service expanded to other cities. The rest is history and is the precursor to today's billion-dollar online dating industry. So, Jeff, it's great to have you here. Christian Rudder and his OkCupid co-founders didn't have to manually enter respondents' personal information into their computers, nor did they require $3. Free service in exchange for sharing personal information has become the de facto underpinning of the internet. For better or worse, we live in a world in which algorithms use that personal data to influence key aspects of our daily lives. The news stories we consume, the vacation spots we travel to, the candidates we vote for, the gadgets we purchase, and the potential mates we pursue. Christian's 2014 book, Dataclysm: Who We Are When We Think No One's Looking, advances the proposition that the massive amounts of data that we voluntarily share on a web of social networks, aggregated and anonymized, we're told, is seeding a revolution in social science and behavioral science. That's a revolution we are seeing here at SEAS from several vantage points on a daily basis. Now, last summer, Christian created a kerfluffle when he disclosed in a blog post that OkCupid had been, quote, experimenting on human beings. Imagine a website manipulating user behavior. I'm shocked. So were a lot of others. Specifically, the site had intentionally told pairs of users that they were good matches when the data in fact showed them to be anything but compatible. I'll let him share the results of that little experiment. We're thrilled to welcome Christian back to Harvard today for a talk he has titled Data, a Love Story: How Data Science and a Great Deal of Tinkering Created the Biggest Dating Site in the US. Please join me in welcoming Christian Rudder.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Is this on? Is it on? Okay, great. Cool. Sorry about that. So, I went to Harvard. I started OkCupid. I did not actually found SparkNotes. The other three founders of OkCupid started SparkNotes. They did it as seniors using at Harvard in, I think, '99, using no university resources whatsoever, of course. So anyway, The site has been successful so far. It's been a very linear growth. The dating industry is odd like that. There's no exponential quantity to it for reasons that we'll probably get into here in a little bit. But at this point, we were acquired by Match in 2011. At this point, I think we've generated some like mid six-digit number of marriages. My best guess, kind of working back from message volume and kind of user lifecycle stuff, we probably create 30,000 first dates a day, like people meeting in person. And I'm going to talk through some of the data, some of the story of OkCupid. I'm not going to focus that much on stuff outside of OkCupid, which I wrote a lot about in my book, because I want to talk about what I know best and fold in a few sort of like practical lessons on how we've gone from where we were to where we are, especially because the site, we started it in 2003. It was a long time ago, and it was a long grind, honestly. It wasn't one of these Facebook things, or Twitter, or Tinder for that matter. And I feel like a lot of this story, and often this is encouraged, I think. The tech industry encourages this or brings it upon itself, likes to talk about these kind of like hero narratives. And for better or worse, you have these sensational successes, these sensational fortunes, or you have these sensational failures like pets.com or whatever. But it's kind of swept under the rug that even for something like Facebook, but certainly for something like OkCupid, there's a tremendous number of mistakes made, dead ends, false starts, and so forth to get you from this idea that you had or you and your friends had to something worth talking about in front of other people, let alone other people using. So I'm going to kind of focus on that because, I don't know, that to me is the interesting part. It's one of these like journey things. And obviously we did a lot of that through data science. Data science is how you tell whether something is a mistake or a success or unclear. You need to do it again. But I do want to say I was in English. I graduated as a math major. I was an English major for actually my middle 2 years, sophomore and junior year. And I think things like intuition and kind of what used to be called a liberal education are still very important for anyone who's thinking about going into computer science, data science, any of that stuff, because statistics and models and whatnot can tell you whether something works or whether your attempt has worked, but it almost never suggests what to try, and that you have to think of yourself and propose yourself from what you know or from what you and your coworkers can figure out. It's like a diagnostic tool, but it can't create that germ of an idea. So I started, I'm working with notes. I never do this, but I'm nervous because it's Harvard. It's so weird. So I started OkCupid in 2003. That's long ago enough to where it basically predates data as an idea or as a kind of umbrella term for what we just thought of as information. We knew we wanted to get information from users, ask them questions, and make mathematically sound decisions. But I really, until maybe 5 years ago, I cannot remember us ever sitting down and talking about user data or any of this stuff. It was just what we were doing. It seemed almost self-evident. We definitely never, the word data science never came up, and it still rarely does. But we were all four math majors. We knew we wanted to bring some level of analysis to this industry, and I'm asked a lot of the time, like, why would four math majors start a dating site? None of us have ever used it. We were all engaged or dating the people we're now married to before we started OkCupid, and I think we had just finished SparkNotes. We saw an industry that had, on the one hand, these kind of open platforms, like what I think of as the Match.com model, where you guys are both 25. She's a man. She's a woman. You're a man. Whatever. Here's a man and a woman. They're both 25. They both live in Boston. It's a match. So we thought that was a little simplistic. At the other end of the spectrum, there was eHarmony. I think the generic term maybe would be a prescriptive approach. eHarmony is one of the only examples, but they were big, especially then. But they had this incredibly long questionnaire of questions that they decided were important and answers that they decided they wanted you to give. So, most famously, they would invite you to leave the site if they thought, well, first, if you were looking for a same-sex relationship, if they thought you were promiscuous, if they thought you weren't dating material, and that's a criteria that they entirely defined. We thought that was far too prescriptive, and so but we liked that they were asking questions, so we wanted to kind of merge the two. And we did this by thinking in our head how two people get to know each other, at least to our, 25-year-old minds. You're talking to somebody, questions are sort of proposed, and you think to yourself how well their answer matches how you wished they would have answered, right? So there's a question, there's an answer, there's the preferred answer, that someone would give you. So like, if you believe in God, chances are you want the other person to believe in God, for example. And then also there's how important the matter at hand is. There's a weight to the questions, okay? And so this is all very obvious and not that hard to write down as a mathematical formula. But this is kind of the beginning of taking an idea, compatibility or matching or whatever you want to call it, and trying to make a function that approximates it. We sat down writing the questions, me and Chris Coyne, who another one of the founders, who, by the way, is the son-in-law of Jeff Tarr, the creator of Operation Match, which is kind of a weird coincidence. We were writing the questions, and we realized, we're sitting here trying to think of what people care about. We're bad judges. We don't even know what we care about. We're just bad judges of all of that. So kind of as a further abdication of our responsibility as matchmakers, we decided to make it an open platform where people can even suggest their own questions to be on this questionnaire, to which the weightings and the answers are open. So as soon as we did that, we had a little bit of experience in SparkNotes with user-generated content. We knew if people were going to be submitting stuff to us, we needed some kind of triage system. Otherwise, it is just like inviting an avalanche of sludge into your home. You have to be able to deal with the good stuff, keep it, and get rid of the tremendous amount of bad stuff that comes in from users. I'm a user of a website. I've submitted plenty of garbage to people. This isn't a burn on anybody. It is just a fact of how things like this go. And so, one of the first and most obvious criteria for what makes a good question, because you always want to ask the next best question, what makes a good question is the average importance. So we threw that in there. We already had that information as part of this asking interface that we designed. And then the second factor is a little bit less obvious, less intuitive. We wanted the questions to be divisive. The kind of classic example for us, and this is an actual user-submitted question, have you ever murdered someone? It is very important to everyone. Nobody wants their potential match to have murdered anybody, but everybody answers all the same way. So it's useless. It tells you nothing because everybody answers it the same way. So our ideal question is rated very important by everybody and splits the user base 50-50. There's very few that are actually like that. And so we put in all this work in this algorithm, and we were high-fiving each other or whatever, and very happy with what we had created. And we launched it, and people were using the site because we were able to piggyback a little bit on the success of SparkNotes, filling out their profiles, typing all this stuff about themselves, doing searches. And we very quickly realized, and maybe you guys have already realized, our recommendation algorithm doesn't fold in the way people look at all. It's just this kind of text-based question and answer thing. But what people were doing, you see all these search results, and they just click on the hottest picture, the men and women both. And it creates what we call what is now called the focus problem. It is something that we are kind of always fighting. What happens is men, because they're the initiators of almost all this stuff, see a page, they click on the hottest woman, proverbially speaking, I guess, send her a ton of messages. She's grossed out or feels overwhelmed or it feels like work. She definitely doesn't respond, and she even might leave. These guys don't get any responses, so that at that point they have two options. They can be bummed out and leave themselves, try eHarmony or whatever, or they can just send more messages, which gets you more of the same problem. So it becomes this big death spiral, a circle of despair. And so we realized very quickly we need some way sort of in advance to know how good-looking people are. And because it would be almost by definition somebody is good-looking if they're getting a lot of messages. But at that point, once that's already happened, the horse is off in some other valley while you're closing the barn door. So we kind of brainstormed a lot and looked at Hot or Not, which was alive at the time, and we were like, that looks like a pretty good interface. And we're also we come up with a lot of really good ideas. We're also excellent rip-off artists, and we created Quick Match. Our innovation here was instead of using 1 to 10 stars, we used 1 to 5, which of course is a huge computer science revolution. This is what it looks like now. You can see it's very basic. There's no genius to this at all. But people crank through these photos super fast and rate them. We get tons of ratings. We essentially were able to crowdsource how good looking everybody is in advance. And at this point, that's the biggest factor in how we recommend people to one another is attractiveness, similarity. It is shown in experiment after experiment that deeper and better conversations arise from people who look similar, not both brunette, but both 6s on a 1 to 10 scale or whatever you want to call it. As an aside, if any of your friends ever complain to you that everyone on OkCupid is ugly, you can laugh to yourself about that, what that says about them. So there's that. This is how this is how the interface used to look, like way a long time ago. This might not be the very first quick match, but it's close. You'll notice as a kind of an awesome testament to how naive we were even then. There's looks and personality. So we, whatever, maybe we were being idealistic. We thought that maybe there was somebody that wasn't really hot that people would think was cool and would rate them as such. Obviously, these two things turned out to be exactly the same for every person, almost. And so we got rid of them. We knew we had a problem when we were kind of just looking through some data, and we had people in bikinis with no text whatsoever having like 4.5-star personalities, and it didn't work. And I guess especially because I kind of want to talk about false starts, or at least point them out as I go through things. Over here, I think this is from like maybe 2007 or something, so maybe right at the height of like Blogger.com and Blogspot. And again, like we're good rip-off artists. Like you get journal posts, journal comments. For some reason, we were calling visit stocks. That's a different media environment back then. You've got wiki edits on your profile, which is kind of crazy. You can collect activity points for some reason. There's just all kinds of stuff that we have tried, and this is after culling the initial round of bad ideas from the site. I remember sitting in the office when someone was like, "Hey, have you heard of this thing, Friendster?" And we're like, "Wow, you check it out, and it's self-evident. It's an amazing thing. You can find your real friend's name online and their picture. It's awesome." So of course, like immediately we try to add a friends layer to this, as Match.com did at the same time, and we have discovered that people do not want their friend network along for this ride. It would be, so it would be like, you go on a first date and you're sitting at a restaurant and like your roommate posts up right next to you, and it would just be the worst thing in the world. So, and we have seen that in a very practical way. And this is the data that both of these pages actually would kick out, and there's no reason to really read these numbers. I like to include this slide, however, because you guys, I'm sure, are a much more advanced audience than a lot of people that I speak to. But I have noticed in my life, and it always makes me cringe, people talking about data and talking about data science. I always have this aspect of like Dumbledore talking to the Muggles about some mystical thing that is like going all around us and that only a few can control or understand. And it's just simply not the case. This is from a SQL. This is an actual pull from the SQL database with these things obfuscated, the IDs obfuscated. If you have ever seen a box score or used Excel, for sure, it is, data science or data is something that you can deal with. There's columns and there's rows. The real big difference is that the number of rows here, we add millions of rows to this table every day. There's something like 4 billion or something like this now. And that requires maybe different tools, but certainly not necessarily different concepts, which I think is very important. And it's also, here's the type. This is all 1 because this type used to be a 1 or a 0 based on looks or personality. So it's very hard to get rid of your mistakes from your database schema. And then there's the score that people have given each other. There's some question about what the score means. I mean, if I rate you a 5, is it because you're very beautiful to me, or you maybe had some amazing thing in your profile text, or maybe I couldn't even tell what you look like and you're kind of doing a handstand in front of Machu Picchu or something crazy, and I'm just like, she looks fun, So, in a sense, that attractiveness rating is just an all-in measure of how, almost like a definitional idea of how interesting you are to somebody for whatever reason. We've done a lot of tests with the quick match interface showing the same people, just their photo, and then also their photo and their text. And it looks like photos are about 92% of your score, just your photos. So whether the photo means you're classically beautiful or what, it's still a little hard to tell. But we basically treat it as your looks internally. This is something very simple that you can do with the data, just as an example, and we did this. The very first thing we did, of course, is to figure out how good-looking the women were on OkCupid. This is a histogram. It's not unlike something you'd see in a textbook. It's relatively well-centered. I think the median here is like 2.83 or something. It should naturally be 3. And when you make an interface that sort of vaguely reflects your prior belief about the world, this is, if attractiveness is genetically distributed, it should be something like this. You've got a few ugly people, a lot of very normal-looking people, and then a few very hot people. And that's, I mean, I'm speaking ugly and hot as shortcuts. There's very many reasons people can end up in either of those buckets, but we were pretty excited about how this works. OkCupid's looking good. And then this is how the guys rate in return. And I remember when I ran this for the first time, my instinctive concern is that all the guys on OkCupid are ugly and busted, and we should probably just shut this whole thing down. Of course, that's not, well, not of course. We tested, I scraped, 1,000 dudes from a social network of similar demographics to our men and ran them through the exact same interface and got the same ratings. So there's every reason to suspect that our guys are normal. It is just that, it's a dating environment. These are just straight men and straight women in this graph. And women are doing the selection, and that costs guys basically half of their, what would be their normal attractiveness. And since, as I mentioned, we're owned by IAC, they also own Match and Tinder, so I know what their graphs look like. And one time I presented this slide right after a behavioral psychologist who was talking about this experiment that kind of ran in 3 parts. And it was one of these kind of classic research things in the quad. And he had a very good-looking woman and a very good-looking man. And the experiment was to run them out, and they would go strike up conversations with strangers, walking through Harvard Yard or whatever, and then ask a question at the end. In the first round, the 2 people went out and struck up conversations and asked, hey, do you want to go on a date? And they got roughly the same number of yeses from the men and women they had spoken to, something like 80% yes. They went out again, chatted people up, and at the end they would ask, hey, do you want to go home with me or go to my apartment? And the man asking that to women got like 5% yeses or something like this. And the woman, talking to the guys, got something like 75, close to 80% yeses, because they're just like, I thought that's what we were talking about anyway, right? They ran the experiment for a 3rd and final time, kind of pushing the bounds, I think, of legality on this one. People walk up and they do this conversation. They ask, hey, do you want to go have sex with me? At that point, the man gets 0 yeses, and the woman gets actually something like 60% of guys being like, yeah, sure, just can you send me the address? And the reason I bring this up because it's an experiment in 3 parts, and it suggests to me a reason for the discrepancy between Tinder and Match's curves in this regard from OkCupid. On Match, where the proposition is very relationship and long-term focused, dating. The blue and the red curves, the red curve is about where it is on OkCupid. The blue curve almost overlaps it. It's very, very slightly to the left. OkCupid, you see how it is. OkCupid's a mix. There's plenty of people who find relationships there. There's plenty of people who are just looking for a one-night stand. On Tinder, certainly by reputation, there's a lot more hooking up that goes on. I'm sure you guys have heard of it and know how it goes. And this blue curve is just jammed up on the y-axis. It's like 40% of guys have a score of less than 5% on that in the data set that I saw. So for me, it was like an interesting thing to kind of see the intersection of some social theory with things that we had seen in a very practical way running a dating site. And running a dating site, one of my favorite things about it is that it is affecting real-world outcomes. And to do that, we have to find out stuff about people. We know everybody's age. For the most part, people exaggerate or lie or whatever. But for the most part, we have a good ballpark. They have to at least look like they're 29 if they say they're 29. We know where people live. We know everyone's gender. We know people's race, and tons of very personal stuff about our users that Twitter doesn't know. They have amazing data of a certain type. They don't know any of that stuff about their users. And so we get to investigate questions and slice up this kind of data by all of these factors, which has always been an interest of mine, and it obviously also helps us run our business. I'm just going to walk through a couple other ways that we've cut things up. When you dice these votes by age, you've got, this is a woman's age and a man's age. In this case, for this chart, the women are doing the voting on the men, and the black squares are the kind of hottest age to the women of that age. So 20-year-old women think 23-year-old guys are the hottest. 25-year-old women think 26-year-old guys are the hottest. 30, 30. And so on, this diagonal obviously means that if a woman is a certain age, the best-looking men are also of that age to her. Like her tastes in men sort of evolve as she grows up until about 39 or 40, and she's like, "That's totally. You guys can stop there." And then the men do this. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. Of course, this is just from our quick match data. When you ask men, like, who do they want to be matched with? Yeah.
In the previous graph,
yeah.
women, there's a periodicity, so that 18-year-old where 19-year-old girls seem to like 50-year-old men in the lower right-hand corner.
Oh, yeah, I see that there, and you see that here too. You know, that's a good question. I doubt it's real. No, that's a great question, and I'm sure of great relevance for probably some faculty or something here. That honestly is probably spammers. We do a really good job of getting rid of them, but there's just very, very few votes that are happening there in the first place that are legit. And you have the people that do get through our sieve. They say they're 20, and they intentionally go seek out older guys. And it doesn't come anywhere close to touching the data in the bigger sets. That's my best guess. Could be real, I don't know. But for guys, when you ask them, they actually give you that diagonal, just like the women both give you and then actually go do. And when you see, these are votes that are very low friction, you know. You can cast a vote on someone essentially without putting yourself out there. And this is, these days with OkCupid, people are notified if you voted well on them or highly for them. This data is from before that. It's more, you know, pure or whatever you want to call it. But you can vote very quickly without putting yourself out there. So if I'm 39, see somebody who's 21, yeah, sure, she's totally hot, or you know, whatever. She doesn't know for the most part. But when you watch where the messages go, you know, you do have to put yourself out there. You have rejection. You have kind of social norms. You have shame come into play. Shame is like a huge motivator, or a factor we always have to keep in mind. You know, I would never, I'm married, but if I weren't, I would never send a message to a 20-year-old woman. It would just be totally crazy, because I know she would be like, get the hell out of here. And so what you actually watch, you can see in the data that guys compromise between this line, and where they send their messages kind of splits the difference. It runs, when you give somebody, you give us an age range that you're open to on OkCupid, and essentially the messages go to that lowest age that you have given us, even though we don't always throttle that search, because people, you know, there's a lot of ego involved in these things. And also odds of success, things like that. So, you know, these graphs are kind of funny and also reflect like a dynamic that is awesome to see in its specificity, but is also not a surprise. Like, you can open a magazine or go to a movie. Most of the actresses are way younger than the guys. That you see that in kind of more depressing ways also in the data. This is by, these are little box plots of again, the female attractiveness by race. You have, for reading these things, this is the kind of low, second quartile and third quartile, bottom 5%, top 5%. And you can see that white women, Asian women, and Latinas are all right in the middle. And black women are basically lose a star. And that's not only from white men, but also from Asian men and Latinos. And you know, you could get this if there were some kind of like hardcore of say, you know, 75% of the non-black men on the site, race didn't matter, and then 25% automatically gave all black women a 0, you could get something like this, for example. But if you go look at the way the voters vote, you see a very similar kind of even shift, just cleanly down. And it's this kind of stuff that we deal with at the office. Not so much race, because it's hard to know what to do with it. There's very little decision-making that you can do. We've published some of this data because we try to be as transparent as we possibly can. Sometimes it brings controversy, as Harry Lewis alluded to, and I'm about to get to that. OkCupid has always tried to tell people what we're doing. We did it early on because we had nothing to lose. We started publishing our data in maybe 2008 or 2009, when we were, again, you know, linear growth. We were very, very small, and people were talking a lot about data. People were talking about how much money Facebook was going to make. It was kind of right before coming up on their IPO. It was at least clear that they were going to IPO. People were obviously talking about security and the NSA and all that kind of stuff. And we saw that there was like a human interest side that we saw in the office all the time, because we collect data about people's lives that we wanted to get out there. And it helped publicize the site, of course, too, but it also reflected just a general belief in talking about what we're doing to people. And by the way, there's more and more sites, and even Facebook, with all the scrutiny that they're under and the stakes that they play at, have started publishing essentially social science research at Facebook/data. I think I knew that one of the only kind of TAs I actually remember from my time at Harvard was my 131 TA. And I remember him because, you know, I was 21, I was a senior, he was 16 and a sophomore, and obviously my TA. And if any of you guys are math majors, he was the #2 scorer on the Putnam that year. I was just like in awe of this dude, and he was like the smartest person I think I had ever met at the time. And I randomly saw his name come up in a I don't even know, from somebody, maybe somebody mentioned him to me like 2 or 3 years ago, and Facebook had put him on their data science team. I was like, these guys are getting very serious, I guess, because I always thought he would go to the NSA or something like this. And so they're publishing very high quality work. They have not done as good a job as OkCupid at publishing, making that known, but it's a fact. I'm sure all of you guys are, many of you are probably trying to be recruited by them and are aware. So this is what an OkCupid match page looks like now. All of this stuff is always changing. Websites are made of change. Even the website itself is an experiment. When we launched, it was an experiment against the null non-existence of OkCupid. We didn't know what we were doing. And I think we have slowly learned, but only through experience. So those first couple months, I'm sure sent many people on many bad dates, obviously without intending to. And our users knew that then, or they must have, because they had never heard of us. And I think they still understand that now. We almost never get complaints from users about any experimental or interface type of thing. But I'll speak specifically to the experiments that we announced over the summer that got so much controversy. But everything is in a second, but everything is in flux. Like these pictures, OkCupid was started in 2004 when it was just thumbnails for both bandwidth concerns, and that was like the aesthetic of the day, something like 80 by 80. And then Pinterest comes along, and now Twitter and Facebook, and now OkCupid have these kind of fuller looking pictures. It just looks better. But we have found that you can't make the pictures too big on a dating site because it exacerbates your focus problem. The more pixels you give to the better looking people, the more attention they soak up proportionally. So again, it's a balance that you have to find. And this ordering has changed so much over time. It used to be just match percentage. Now there's basically 4 factors generally in play. There's match percentage, which is the third of the 4. First is how similarly attractive you are. Second is how many unread messages are in people's inboxes. So even if you're a perfect match otherwise, if you have 10 unread messages in your inbox, that 11th one is probably not going to get answered, and what we're trying to generate is conversations. And then fourth is a random number, and actually a pretty big weight. I like to say that it's kind of a nod to the serendipity of love. It's a mathematical expression. Obviously, it's really there because for a dating search, it can't be deterministic. It can't be like Google search, where people put in a thing and they get a #1 result. You can't do that on a dating site because people want to see more. You got to like stir the pond. So everybody's always coming up. The site seems dead if they see the same 10 people every time they do a search, even if in theory those same 10 people are the 10 best for them. And this match percentage has been recentered, kind of like SAT scores, several times. We've had factors thrown in and out of it. But the experiment that we announced this summer was we wanted to test, it was like more fundamental. We wanted to test, did we know at all, or was match percentage doing anything, or was it like the Selsun blue thing where it was just tingling and so people thought it was working? So what we did for pairs of people that were in the test group, we would take the match percentage number here. I know this is awfully small. This says 90% right here. We would take certain match percentages, 90%, 60%, and 30%. And if you were in a pair and then your match percentage also triggered, fell into one of those percentages, we would spoof it, basically put in a placebo and put in an array of placebos. So sometimes 30, sometimes 60, and sometimes 90. And so this is just, so here's the natural state of OkCupid. This is the experimental state that caused so much outrage. This person right here, instead of being 90, was 60. And the upshot of doing all this stuff, we were essentially testing what we had spent all this time working on against a placebo, checking our work, so to speak. And found that, honestly, like half of whether 2 people exchange a bunch of messages on OkCupid is just that we say they should talk to each other. The other half, the match percentage does predict. But there was some tingling, and therefore it was working type of thing going on, which of course is humiliating in its way, but is also very good to know. And so we made a change to the interface and emphasized it when you were above 90%. We found that when people knew they were 90%, even if they were 60%, they would talk more and have better conversations. So now when our algorithm kicks out 90%, we emphasize it all the more. And as far as the controversy that surrounded this, in this particular experiment, because we were testing something so fundamental, we let everybody know after they were in it that they had been in it and issued a corrected match percentage. And we got 0 complaints from any of those people, none. And then we went through and looked, because we have a user ID of the complainer, user ID of people that were in the experiment. We got a couple hundred complaints over about a month, almost all of which started with, I heard on the news about you guys, and fuck you, basically. So anyone who has run a consumer website is used to hearing those 2 words all the time, so we're like, all right, fine. We get thousands of complaints a day about all kinds of problems. OkCupid is full of holes. There's tons of dumb stuff that we do and just can't get to, or that works regardless of what people think about it, that people complain about. So the user response was honestly very mild compared to other things that we've gotten ourselves into. And I think one thing that I assume all of you guys understand, that websites are always changing. Facebook is always changing its algorithms. Google search is always changing its algorithms. And whether it's a dating site or whether it's Google, if Google decides to put something up at the top, it not only makes it way more popular, it changes people's perception about the world ever so subtly. If they decided to prioritize certain results for Israel, say, they could change the zeitgeist or what people think about Israel, for example. And so that to the extent that everyone is kind of people's lives are mediated by things like OkCupid or Google or Facebook, there is always going to be this situation where what some programmers have kind of written down or dreamed up or were talking shit with their friends about and thought would be a good idea is going to be part of people's lives. And it's important to understand that all these things are always changing and to always take any recommendation with a grain of salt. I think that's part of why we started OkCupid, because eHarmony had this thing where they recommended 3 people to you, and that is all you could do. Their recommendations were like the word of God to their users. Here are the 3 people that you can talk to today. If you don't like it, tough, we'll see you tomorrow, And imagine a Netflix that was like that now, where instead of having some movies you may like, which might be full of stuff that you don't like, they gave you 3 movies, and that's it. You could watch these 3 recommendations that we've come up with. So, I think a company like Netflix, certainly a company like OkCupid, recognizes that our guess is almost always going to be wrong. Certainly for dating, there will never be a dating site, in my ability to imagine it, that will be able to account for people having an amazing, she has an amazing profile, she has an amazing picture, she seems so perfect. You sit down and her breath smells, or she's has an annoying laugh, or any of this stuff. Her sweater is ugly. There's a million things that can go wrong in a first date, or right, that a computer I don't think will ever capture. Certainly, probably not in my lifetime. So, and we try to stop with just who you might want to talk to. And that's what our kind of recommendation engine is based around. I left the company about 6 weeks ago. I'm still an advisor, but I'm not there day to day anymore. So I don't even know what is happening with OkCupid, but I'm sure they are still making as many mistakes as I made with my co-founders, and tinkering as much as we were, because that's how all these technologies are made, through change. And it's kind of my hope as people begin to understand this, hopefully the tech industry will own up to making more bad decisions, frankly. Just dumb ideas. OkCupid has had so many dumb ideas that so many failures that look in retrospect like obvious failures. I think it would do itself a service, not acting like you're a genius with a headset mic on a big stage, So that's what I have to say about where we are and kind of how we got there. I'm happy to answer people's questions if there are any. All right, thanks.
Thanks so much. Look, questions from the audience. Start a conversation. Yes, sir. Would you like me to call, or do you want to call?
I could do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Unless there are any known agitators that I shouldn't call
that's
on.
right.
All right.
The people I planted will have to.
Was there a question
fight
back there, or is that? You're right there.
Do you see any other big sort of matching markets that the internet can help with in terms of making some matching mechanism?
I like most, startup founders or entrepreneurs or whatever, people like to pitch me their ideas, and there's like a Tinder for business or a OkCupid for roommates, and the weakness in these ideas is twofold, but they're related. There's very little. Who your roommate is or who your mentor is or whatever is never going to be as important to you as who you're going to actually go on a date with and who you might sleep with. Therefore, it's very, very hard to get people to just sit through the slog of entering in all this information. The average OkCupid user answers over 300 questions And with that information, not only are they kind of more invested in the experience and therefore just kind of inherently loyal to you, you can make better decisions for them and better recommendations. So there are tons of things that would be great to have that information and make very data-based decisions for. You're just going to have almost an impossible time getting people to play ball with you, in my opinion. In the back, in the white sweater, please.
Where do you see online dating going in the next 10 years?
You know, 2 years?
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to repeat the question so that they'll get picked up on the audio.
I can go ahead. No, go ahead.
So the question is, where do you see online dating going in the next few years?
Sure. You know, I think online dating is just, the dust is just settling on kind of a revolution or a big change in online dating with Tinder and kind of apps that are very purely photo-based. OkCupid, in some sense, I think we do a great job. Algorithmically, I know we do a better job than Tinder, for example. But is also a dinosaur. Like, you can't type on your phone, you know? And there's these profiles, like I can't even think of another site that you type a little essay about yourself. It's like applying to Harvard or something, you know? And I think, that's something OkCupid is working on adapting to, and of course matches as well. And I think that the app kind of yes, no, just flipping through a bunch of photos, kind of gamification or whatever you want to call it, that is just happening. That will continue, and since it's a little bit in flux, it's so hard to say. The kind of knee-jerk sort of technologist answer will be wearables. I personally am skeptical about wearables in dating. I think for kind of the same reason, people just, because you're meeting people in person, more kind of traditional privacy or I guess privacy is the right word. Privacy concerns come in. Not necessarily like, okay, Cupid's knowing stuff about me, but all these other people are knowing stuff about me. Like people, I think it's hard for me to imagine people being comfortable being in a bar and their watch buzzes and another watch buzzes over there, and then what are you even supposed to do at that point? You know, that's like, I would run. So I'm basically punting. I don't really know. Right behind him in the white.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm a lawyer by training and a sociologist, PhD student. So I want to ask one question, if you permit, from each of those worlds. Sure. One is that you said, referring specifically to Facebook, that this is like social science or data. And if you could weigh in a little more on whether you think this is social science, maybe from a methodological point of view, that would be great. And the second question is, from the point of view of law, if you were like a government agency, there'd be a clear case for disparate impact, given the unfavorable position or the effect on black women, for example, of this sort of infrastructure that you have made sort of instrumentalized. You're not a government agency, so there would be no case, but I wonder if you could weigh in a little bit on the implications.
Why don't you repeat the question?
Okay, so the first question, I'm going to answer your second one first, and that question is, can I weigh in on the disparate impact OkCupid has on the dating lives of the black women who use it? Is that an okay paraphrase? Okay, so to be clear, that chart that I had, when you look at data from any dating site, whether it's Match.com, any of the dating sites that I've seen, let me put it that way, has the exact same pattern.
So it's a race to the bottom for black women.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I don't know. That the graph speaks for itself in a certain sense, and like, it's because you see that same pattern. And these are three sites. The three sites that I've looked at, they have different user acquisition models. They have a different voting interface. They have different user bases, mostly because of the different acquisition model. But one of them is even, Match and OkCupid have roughly the same racial demographics. But the third site, Date Hookup, which has since closed, but at the time had 2 or 3 million users and was 20% black and 20% Latino. So you have three vastly different sites, and they have the same pattern. And I think it is more reflective of unfortunate cultural norms, in the same way that the men voting on women just want to see young women.
Related to that, so the remedy in law would be something like affirmative action, where if you assume that it's not just that black women are sort of inherently undesirable, that you needed to sort of foreground other things about them if there was this immediate, probably socially conditioned reaction to their appearance. Do you think your company as a whole would be opposed to implementing those kind of, in these instances, we foreground other kinds of... So
the question is, would OkCupid as a company be opposed to a kind of dating affirmative action? And by the way, I agree with your diagnosis of the problem. But see, here we're dealing, like, while the overall pattern, and this is my belief, I can't speak for the company on this, but while the overall pattern is racist or racially motivated, however you want to call it. Like, it's very hard to call an individual who's voting in a certain way about who he or she wants to spend time with on that Friday night a racist for voting based on how attracted you, how much you want to sleep with someone, to put it frankly. And like, there's very little that we can do to change people's, I mean, you know, the hundreds of years of conditioning that's gone into that reaction, if that's what it is. And if, suppose for a second we did change the way interfaces looked for black users, or even just went out of our way to recommend black users to people, even knowing that they might not be accepted, or whatever you want to call it, be voted on highly. I don't know if just more recommendations is going to help, is going to change the votes. Honestly, you know.
Okay. Well,
So,
I think
I'm happy to talk to you about it more. I'm happy to talk to you about it more.
I don't think we didn't
Sure.
keep doing follow-ups on this.
Try someone on this man in the front, please.
People are obviously disclosing a lot of very personal and private information about themselves, and so you might think that, in a sense, they forfeited their right to privacy. Nonetheless, privacy is the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Here, how do you approach it? What are the agreements that people sign with respect to their own and others' privacy, and how do you protect it?
How does OkCupid approach privacy or think about privacy?
Sure. So, you know, our terms of service are very permissive, which implicitly everyone agrees to by using the site. In terms of practical controls, you know, our encryption and in general, our security team is world-class. Many Harvard graduates, MIT, CMU. And we put in a tremendous amount of effort into making sure that OkCupid is never hacked and all of this stuff comes out. That might even be the end of OkCupid. In the same way that it would probably, if not the end of Facebook, it would severely damage Facebook if somebody, you know, got a hold of 1 million Facebook accounts and all of the stuff that came with that. But also, you know, this stuff, despite me pulling out 10 rows, which you can algorithmically obfuscate in advance so that nobody's privacy is violated, you can all the analysis we do internally is aggregated and anonymized. There's almost no reason, given the scale of even a site like OkCupid, which is a fraction the size of, say, Facebook, to go look up one particular person. And if I found out that there was a programmer who was stalking an ex-girlfriend or maybe vetting somebody who was thinking, you would be fired for doing that, you know? And I guess that's a weak punishment, but that's how that is. You have to kind of rely on some basic goodness as far as your controls that you've put in for people, you know, limiting who can access the database and so forth. Other than that, you know, that's your information is locked up as cryptographically and as secure as we can get it, and policy-wise, all of that stuff is in place. Can we stop a bad actor or some rogue employee who goes, you know, totally crazy and is willing to go to jail for whatever it is that he wants to do, outing a bunch of people or something? We can't stop that person. But I think, you know, it's important. Privacy is definitely an elephant in the room, but I think it's important to kind of decouple what, say, private companies are doing from other privacy concerns, like what the NSA is doing, for example, where, you know, Facebook may be wondering how Game of Thrones fans, how many ads those people are clicking on, or what other kinds of media things they're talking about, or OkCupid is wondering how guys act or how young dudes act on OkCupid. But nobody on the NSA, and the NSA is sitting around wondering, like, I wonder what women are up to. You know, that's just not a question that they're posing to themselves. They're saying, what is this specific person whose specific name we're now looking at? Who are they talking to? Who are we going to go pick them up, or are we going to go pick their friends up? And it becomes very personal. All the work that happens at a company like OkCupid is aggregated and anonymized whenever it's pulled out on a specific level. I'm just going to kind of sweep the room. So, and I'll do in the back, actually. Those with the stripes, You guys
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have to say personally, it's been very successful for me, so I have to
Good.
thank you personally.
Thank you.
In life, and the matches, you know, the plus 90% really does work with empirical evidence. But I guess my question is, and this may be a selection bias on the people that I'm running into, but it does strike me, at least as the people, even if I scan the lower matches, that everybody seems to be relatively well off, educated. You have to write, like, if you write something with extremely strong jargon and very poor grammar, you're not going to do very well, as far as I can tell, at least as a guy. And so sort of in a more broad question in terms of, like, the audience, do you find that it sort of self-selects for, say, upper middle class, educated, whites and Asians, and is that maybe another reason that you're not really sampling the US population, but you're sampling only the part of it that tends to aggregate toward an online app for dating, etc., and how do you sort of look at that?
So is the pool that you draw a socioeconomically biased in some way?
Sure. Yeah, of course. You know, I mean, we skew more coastal. We skew more wealthy, if you want to call it that. But I'd be careful in drawing conclusions based on who you see because they're by design nearby and so forth, and have some kind of sympathy with you somehow, whether it's they look similar to you, which probably spans socioeconomic boundaries, but have similar compatibility scores and all of this kind of thing, and as I assume your friends do, right? So, you know, there are all kinds of people who use OkCupid. OkCupid's demographic breakdown is roughly is in line with the breakdown of, by race at least, of internet-enabled Americans. It's 80% white, 70% white, and 7, 7, and 7 Asian, Latino, and Black, which is slightly less Black and slightly less Latino. I think nationally it's maybe 9% of either of those. It's very close. In terms of age, you're right. Yeah, we don't have that many 60-year-olds on OkCupid. Income, we have no data. I mean, we do have data. It is worthless. So because people say that they, you know, I actually counted up one time. We have more self-reported millionaires on OkCupid today than exist, according to the IRS, in the entire United States. We have a small group, maybe I don't know if I'm a single-digit percentage of our users subscribe and pay us. The rest of it is free and ad supported. So.
Do you think the education data is valid though? Because that would be highly correlated with income.
I was asked if I think the education data is correlated, is valid. Sorry. Probably not. I think we also include Space Camp as an education option. So you know whenever we're doing analysis for business reasons or when I'm doing research for the blog or for my book, I almost never take self-reported information except as an artifact of self-representation. To look at maybe the discrepancy between the two things. I was talking to a professor here about an hour ago about a shift that he noticed on an Indian dating site that I also noticed on OkCupid. If you do the histogram of men's heights, if you put the census down, you get that nice bell curve that genes would dictate. If you look at OkCupid, you get the exact same thing except shifted slightly 2 inches to the right, with a little notch at 5'11", because everybody who is actually 5'11" says that they're 6 feet tall. So you do get that kind of stuff. But insofar as the self-selection affects, obviously we have to be aware of that. It's obvious to me that it's only internet users, it's only online daters, it's only single people. And so for doing OkCupid, that self-selection is sort of irrelevant because it's only people on OkCupid that we need to think about. For doing sociological stuff, I try to look at things just like attraction because that is, I don't think there's a real reason to believe that that's only I think it's a good data set for that. I don't know if the probably slightly richer nature of an OkCupid user really affects, say, the racial patterns. If anything, it should mitigate the problem, you'd think.
Okay, we've established that people lie on the internet. Now,
sorry.
Next question.
Yeah, sorry. You right there.
Yeah, so you've got the book, and now OkCupid is behind you. So what's the next move?
So I was asked what my next move is. I really don't know. I mean, I'm two of my collaborators at OkCupid are now working on a thing called Keybase, and it looks very exciting. But they're going to be doing that for a while. Although I'd love to be working with them again. I kind of missed that boat. I'm just gonna. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I might try to write another book, but if I have to write another book about the internet or data, I might not make it all the way through my life. So, you in the front.
So for the data science side, how advanced are the algorithms you use? Is the point to come up with the deepest learning networks and RVMs and so on, or is the point to just have some nice regression models that work well tune the weights? Like, what is the thought on that?
So the questioner is asking about the sophistication of our algorithms. Honestly, what we do is pretty basic. There's very little. It's almost like the 80-20 rule. Like I feel like you can do 20% of the work and get 80% of the result with doing very simple, almost just arithmetical things, testing them against one another. Our ability to test two states at once is indispensable. You know, it obviates also a lot of theorizing. You know, and we are very small, 28 people total, so we can't just throw 10 people at some problem on a whim trying to do some deep learning thing about how to recommend profiles better. So there's that practical thing too. People come to OkCupid because they're like very excited to work on difficult kind of human problems and then codify them into something that works, but very rarely are the statistical or CS tools like super elaborate. Yeah, with the curly hair.
You mentioned at the beginning the idea that men have to do mass messaging, and I know from talking to many of my male friends that they get pretty frustrated by that. Have you thought about changing the algorithm in some way to make the playing field a little bit more encouraging for men?
Well, the real thing is encouraging for.
Repeat the question.
I was asked if we are going to change, because men have to send so many messages to find success on OkCupid, are we going to change the interface to make it more encouraging for them? And what I was about to say is the real thing is to make it more encouraging for the women, because if these men got more responses, they would have to write fewer messages in the first place. So I think, that is, and I'm not even just saying this, like the single most valuable currency on OkCupid is a message from a woman to a guy. Unfortunately, the dynamics that are in play, whether it's just online, I doubt it, or broadly socially, mean that women are very passive and wait for men, by and large, wait for men to write them, and that creates this problem. We've tried having message filters, giving women more message filters, but that's a dangerous thing. If any tool complex enough to really do the job also runs a serious risk of allowing the user to blow themselves up, where they set, I want dudes over 6'3", who live within a mile of me, who match me this and this and this, and they have no messages all of a sudden and leave and don't realize why. And it's like a classic user experience problem. So it is a balance that every dating site that I'm aware of is working to fight. It's a very hard problem.
Have you thought of doing audio-video messaging rather than text messaging?
That has certainly been suggested to us. I can't even imagine the amount of full frontals that would be coming through the, because it would be so hard. It would be so hard to moderate that stuff. Yeah. And also, to me, the worst kind of first date would be like a video first date where you meet somebody via video. You can't be there with them in person, but all the awkward chit chat is still there. I know there's been some sites that have tried to launch with video and have failed.
I'm just thinking of the study of Harvard course evaluations that established that most of the information content in QGuide scores you can get from 2 seconds of video with the sound off, actually.
Oh, sure. That's amazing.
That's actually mostly what the QGuide scores portray. I mean, with people who've never seen the professor before, it's just completely independent. It has nothing to do with what you're teaching or how you're teaching it. It's
just like the body language and what have you.
It's whether you're cheerful and optimistic looking on video with no audio.
I think there'd be a lot of guys who are cheerful and optimistic.
For as little as 2 seconds, yeah.
Yeah. That would be a tough one. The answer is no, we've never done that.
Okay, all right, there we go.
I encourage someone to try.
Okay, we got time for probably one more question. We can, one or two.
Right
one
there,
or two.
please.
Where they're short.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you're actually a bit jealous of Tinder, because it sort of feels like the disruptor you is being disrupted itself. Are you missing the boat there?
So the question is, am I jealous of Tinder? I think what they've built is great. I think it's a great interface. I know the guys, or I've met the guys who started that site. I definitely would not want to be those guys.
Why?
Just that's how that is. But so, and honestly, even year over year, the last 2 years have been better than ever for OkCupid. And Tinder so far has managed to, the industry cliche would be to catalyze new users rather than cannibalize from us. We're in the same portfolio, so there's less to fear. I'd probably feel a little differently if they weren't owned by IACS as well. They've been great for the industry. I think they brought, if you look at the distribution of ages on OkCupid, obviously in the real world, there are many more single 18 and 20-year-olds than there are, say, 25-year-olds, yet 29 is our median age. And that's because people before Tinder who are 18, they don't need a dating site. They have a dorm room. They have Winthrop or whatever, You meet plenty of eligible and willing single people in college, for example. You don't need a dating site. But the people use Tinder now. The answer is no. I think I would feel a lot more of an existential threat for OkCupid if we weren't collaborators with them in a sense. So there's that. There's a lot of other better things to be jealous of too in the world. I mean, there's Facebook, for example. So.
Are you hoping that the Tinder users of today are gonna use OkCupid in a year? Is that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're definitely hoping they're not OkCupid users. Or not whatever I'm trying to say. You guess. Fill in the
Okay,
blanks.
one more.
I'll do one more.
One more last question.
Yeah, in the far back over there.
Curious about your study where you try to have fake match percentages to test sort of the placebo effect. I'm just curious how you sort of differentiate the fact that users sort of trust the percentages based on past reputation, past experience. I think of the weather report or financial ratings where you have the reputation effect versus users who would trust any ratings thrown at them, and how you use it to evaluate your.
Right, that's a good question. I mean, he asked how we disentangle our result from our of the placebo effect from our reputation rather than just generically trusting an algorithm. Is that a good paraphrase? The answer is, I mean, we did it to sort of check our reputation, so we didn't necessarily look at the difference between, we could have done just new users coming into the system and therefore tested our reputation a little bit, but that's also be a very hard thing to control for because they might have heard from their friend that we worked or whatever it is. So we did it just to make sure what we had founded the site on was viable. We didn't look too much further as to why that placebo effect might be in place, whether it's our reputation or just a kind of general naivete about algorithms at all.
Okay, so before we thank our speaker one last time, I also want to thank the Institute for Advanced Computational Science and Pavlos Protopappas and Kathy Schut in particular, who are our real hosts here today rather than me as dean. So thank you for that. And Christian, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful talk.
Thanks for having me, you guys.